Okay, well, thank you all so much for joining us for an informational session today, focusing on the most recent updates of the professional degree and the student loan issues, particularly for PA students. I'm Emma Sellers, Chief Recruitment and Engagement Officer at PAEA, and I'll serve as facilitator today. This session is led by PAEA's Chief Policy Officer, Tyler Smith, and Manager for Government Relations, Catherine Majewski. After Tyler and Catherine's presentation, we will have time for questions and answers. To ensure that as many questions as possible are answered, please enter your questions using the Zoom Q&A feature. Again, please enter your questions using the Zoom Q&A feature. Also, it's important to note that this session is being recorded, and you will receive a notification in the coming days on how to access the recording. Thank you again for joining us, and I'll now turn things over to Tyler and Catherine.
Great. Well, thanks, Emma, and good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for taking the time to join us. As Emma mentioned, my name is Tyler Smith, and I serve as Chief Policy Officer at PAEA, and I'm really pleased to be joined today by my colleague, Catherine Majewski, who serves as PAEA's Manager of Government Relations. Today's webinar is really intended to help prospective PA students, current PA students, advisors, as well as our member programs understand the significant changes that have occurred in federal student lending over the past year, but really in particular over the past week following the district court intervention in DC regarding the definition of professional degree. Throughout this process, there has been a great deal of uncertainty, particularly following the enactment of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, the Department of Education's subsequent rulemaking, and the litigation that PAEA and AAPA filed in response. And our goal today is really to provide as much clarity as we can with the recognition that there is still significant ambiguity and that we're working actively with the Department of Education to provide as clear of guidance as possible to institutions and all other stakeholders. So today, our goal is not simply to explain the recent legal developments, but we want to explain what they mean in practical terms, where things currently stand, what remains uncertain, and why we remain optimistic about the future moving forward on this issue. As Emma said, we'll leave plenty of time at the end of today's session for questions. And then finally, one disclaimer before we get started. Today's session does not constitute legal advice, and PAEA is unable to provide individual guidance on personal student aid circumstances. If you are a current or incoming student, questions you may have particular to your financial situation are best directed to your institution's financial aid office. But our goal today is really to give you an overview of the current policy and legal landscape broadly for the PA profession and PA students. With that, I wanted to dedicate some time to going through the agenda of what we plan to cover in our prepared presentation before we jump into questions. So today we'll begin with a brief review of how PA students typically finance their education. I think this provides important context for understanding why these recent changes matter and a sense of the tools that are available to students as they seek to pay for their programs and then ultimately enter the profession. Next, we'll go ahead and explain what changed under the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, talk about how the designation of professional student is relevant from a student aid perspective. We'll then move to talking a bit about why PAEA and AAPA made the move to file a lawsuit against the Department of Education last month, review the court's preliminary decision, explain the department's current guidance, and then conclude with our ongoing advocacy efforts. What hasn't changed in terms of access to loan repayment and forgiveness options, and then a few key takeaways before moving to Q&A.
Tyler, I'm sorry to interrupt. We're getting a few notes that there's an echo. I'm not some where several of us aren't hearing it, but it does sound like a few folks are. If you can log out and then rejoin, we'll make sure you get back in. And again, it is being recorded, so you'll have access to that. I apologize for that, but I'm not sure how else to handle that right now.
Great. Well, with that, I'll go ahead and hand it off to Catherine to start with how PA students pay for school.
Yeah, thank you, Emma, and thank you, Tyler. So as Tyler said, I'm going to go ahead and start with the issue that brings us all here today, which is how PA students pay for school. Federal student aid is the foundation of PA education financing, so much so that more than 85% of PA students rely on federal loans to some extent. Beyond that, the Department of Education data also shows that more than 75% of PA students require substantially more than the $20,500 annual graduate loan limit that was recently established to go ahead and complete their education. Federal loans are really valuable, not only because they provide access to aid, but also because they generally offer stronger borrower protections, flexible repayment options, and also eligibility for programs such as the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. I'll also say this doesn't take away from the importance of things like scholarships, savings, and private loans as financing options for many students. But those tend to be the tools that supplement rather than fully replace federal financing. So before July 2026, the system was relatively straightforward. Students first borrowed direct unsubsidized loans, and that was up to the annual limit. And if there was a situation where additional funding was needed, Grad Plus loans enabled students to borrow up to the institution's certified cost of attendance. For many PA students, this meant that they could complete their education without having to turn to the private lending market at all. However, Congress fundamentally changed the system by eliminating Grad Plus loans for new borrowers, and that was beginning on July 1st, 2026. So, unfortunately, yesterday. Congress also created different annual loan limits depending on whether a student is classified as a graduate student or as a professional student. Graduate students remain limited to $20,500 annually, as I mentioned before, while professional students may borrow up to $50,000 annually. For PA education, the annual limit is particularly significant because most programs are completed in approximately 2 to 3 years, give or take.
Thanks, Catherine. So, with that disparity between graduate and professional loan limits in mind, the next question naturally becomes what exactly is a professional degree? So, fortunately, Congress already determined the answer to what a professional student is by incorporating an existing regulatory definition when it passed H.R. 1 or the One Big Beautiful Bill Act last year. That definition had three components. It's typically referred to as the three-part test, and it's listed here. So the definition focused on completion of the educational requirements necessary to begin practice in a profession, preparation beyond the bachelor's degree level, and professions that generally require licensure as a condition of practice. So, very clear three-part definition. In addition to those three components, the department or Congress also cited examples of what is a professional degree, but it's important to understand that these were just examples and that they included both doctoral degrees and master's level degrees. So, this definition ultimately became the central issue in the litigation that we pursued. After the Congress passed the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, the Department of Education engaged in negotiated rulemaking in which the department adopted additional criteria beyond those that were contained in the incorporated definition that Congress required the department to use. PAEA and AAPA believe these additional requirements, which include things like a doctoral level requirement for the degree, specific placement within the classification of instructional programs, designation used by the department, and a requirement that professional students could not be supervised in subsequent clinical practice, significantly exceeded what Congress had authorized and were ultimately unlawful. So what's important to understand is that even though the department conceded that PA students met the three-part test that Congress required, these additional criteria resulted in the exclusion of incoming PA students, as well as nursing students, physical therapy, occupational therapy, and a number of other professions from being classified as professional students. So that, as I mentioned before, these additional criteria were the foundation of the lawsuit that PAEA and AAPA brought against the Department of Education. So just to speak into the the technicalities of the lawsuit. So on June 3rd, PAEA and AAPA filed our lawsuit in the United States District Court for the District of Columbia, arguing that the agency significantly exceeded its authority in imposing new criteria with the effect of excluding incoming PA students. In the lawsuit, we requested two forms of relief. So, first, we sought a preliminary injunction, which is an emergency measure seeking to prevent the department's amended definition from taking place before July 1st. The second request that we made was for the court to ultimately decide the merits of the case and provide permanent relief if it agreed that the department had acted unlawfully in developing these additional criteria. On June 24th, we were successful in achieving the first stage of our lawsuit. The court granted the preliminary injunction that we were seeking, and this number one why we're all together today, but it also represented an important milestone because preliminary injunctions require courts to conclude that plaintiffs have demonstrated, among other things, a likelihood of success on the merits. Rather than paraphrase the court, we wanted to include Judge Howell's own words here. So, in the opinion that the judge issued, she stated plaintiffs have established that they are likely to succeed on their Administrative Procedure Act claim that the rule's definition of professional degree is contrary to law, that they would suffer irreparable harm should the rule go into effect, and that the balance of equities and the public interest are in their favor. So it's important to note, as has been communicated through both PAEA's channels as well as EAPA's, that this is not a final ruling, but it is an important indication that the court believed that we presented a strong legal case and that the department could not implement its definition of professional student as of July 1st, as was originally intended. So, in terms of where we stand now, so following the court's order on June 24th, the department issued interim guidance on June 29th, identifying PA programs as professional programs while the preliminary injunction remains in effect and while we prepare to litigate on the merits of the case. It's important to note that the court specifically prevented the department from using the additional criteria that it proposed to exclude professions. So this isn't just limited to PA programs. It's also limited. It also applies to a number of other health professions and other programs that meet the three-part test that Congress mandated when it passed the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. So, like I said, looking ahead, the litigation will now move to consideration on the merits, which we anticipate will take a significantly longer period of time over the coming months. The other thing that I would just flag before turning it back to Catherine is that PAEA is continuing to work with Congress to provide long-term certainty to both PA and other health professions students. While we're currently pursuing this most urgently through the courts, Congress can also act to resolve the lingering uncertainty here and make sure that PA students have the assurance that they need long-term to commit to pursuing the profession with the certainty that they'll have the financial resources to do so. So with that, I'll turn it back to Catherine.
So what does this mean for students? So for prospective students, our advice is simple. If becoming a PA is your goal, this issue should not in any way discourage you from ultimately pursuing that career. For current students, please continue working closely with your financial aid office just to understand your individual borrowing situation. There's lots of nuances depending on the person. And students enrolled and borrowing under Grad Plus before July 1st under the statutory grandfather provisions continue to have access to Grad Plus as an option through the end of their program. So that's something important to note as well. For PA programs and advisors, you all remain trusted sources of information, but we also realize that financial aid decisions are highly individualized. We encourage PA programs to direct students to qualified financial aid professionals while also referring students to official updates that we'll be putting out from PAEA on our end and also from AAPA and the Department of Education. So please do keep an eye out for those. With respect to what is next for our advocacy efforts, litigation represents only one component of our larger advocacy strategy. Litigation is how we are solving the current dispute over the department's rule, while congressional action is something that can help to provide lasting certainty, just so that PA students aren't faced with similar uncertainty in the future, as Tyler kind of already mentioned before. In other words, it's very similar to fixing a damaged road. The lawsuit's kind of meant to fix a pothole that's there today, and congressional action is meant to actually redesign the road so that the pothole doesn't keep popping back up over time in the future. But with this in mind, we're continuing to support legislation, including the Professional Student Degree Act. This is a bill that would explicitly identify PA students as well as other health profession students as professional students. And we are also pursuing other congressional opportunities, such as leveraging the appropriation process that could provide additional certainty as well. So the work certainly continues on this front. Also, even beyond traditional federal loans, students should remember that there are other opportunities to reduce educational costs. So these include the National Health Service Score, scholarships and loan repayment, military educational benefits, and the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program for eligible borrowers that are working in qualified public service positions. While these options are available, interested students should note that some are restricted to just forgiving federal loans and not private loans. So always make sure to note the catch in the fine print and make sure that the opportunity that you're seeking is compatible to your current situation. So that's just one final thing I would note, and I'll turn it back over to Tyler.
Great. Thanks, Catherine. So turning now to what can you do while litigation is moving forward, while advocacy is moving forward. So the most helpful step that individuals can take, regardless of their position, is continuing to stay informed. Continue following updates that PAEA and AAPA put out, as well as guidance from the Department of Education. And then also, in terms of advocacy, definitely consider participating in grassroots advocacy efforts as opportunities arise. Policymakers benefit from hearing directly from students and educators, and our success in being able to help facilitate the introduction of the Professional Student Degree Act was a direct result of students, institutions, parents, faculty making their voices heard about why saying once and for all that PAs are professional students is so important. So, before we turn to questions, I wanted to conclude by emphasizing just a few key points. So, first and foremost, PA education remains an outstanding investment in a rewarding profession that meets an important national workforce need. Regardless of the classification for student loan purposes, I cannot reiterate enough that PAs are professional students. They contribute to the health of communities across this country, and their education is rigorous, and they deserve the financial aid that they need in order to complete their programs. So that's first, and I really just wanted to take the time to say that as an important takeaway. Second, because of the court's preliminary injunction and the department's subsequent guidance that they issued earlier this week, PA students are currently being treated as professional students, at least through the course of our litigation as it moves forward on the merits. Third, PAEA and AAPA remain fully committed to obtaining a durable solution, whether that be through the courts, through Congress, or both. And we need your help as future students, as advisors, and as programs in order to do so. And then finally, we recognize that this uncertainty can be stressful, especially for folks that are making important life decisions based upon the access to financial aid that they'll have. And that's why we believe it's so important to remain in this fight until PA students are once and for all permanently recognized as professional students. PAEA and AAPA are fully committed to doing everything in our power to get this resolved, to make sure that there's a durable pipeline of graduates to this high value profession. And we certainly need your help to do so. The last technical point that I would just reiterate that we made from the top. While PAEA is directly involved in the policy and legal aspects of this fight, The folks that are on the front lines in terms of administering access to federal financial aid are your institutional financial aid offices. So, to the extent that you have individual questions about like FAFSA forms, like accepting or modifying loans you may have been offered, your first point of contact is going to be your institutional financial aid office, who will be able to give you information that is specified to your particular situation. So with that, thank you for joining us today and for your attention. We appreciate this opportunity to provide an update of what we know at this stage, and we look forward to answering your questions. One other point, if we are unable to answer every question today, please feel free to email either myself or Catherine. Our emails are available on the PAEA website. And we'll, like I said before, PAEA and AAPA will also continue sharing updates as we know them through all of our communications channels.
Great. Thank you, Tyler and Catherine. And I'm glad we have plenty of time for some questions. So, and Tyler and Catherine, I'll just kind of read the question and y'all take it, however makes most sense. Can you provide, in addition to what you have today, provide some reliable websites or resources that folks might be able to give their students?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oops, sorry, go.
Oh no, go ahead. Tyler, you can add to this too, but I just wanted to note that at the start of the webinar that Rania did drop a really great resource in the chat. It's the FAQ the PAEA just put out. It covers what the ruling means, next step in the legal process, and immediate implications for students, programs, and advisors. So I highly encourage you to check that one out. And thank you, Rania, for sharing that out. That's certainly a good resource to reference. And Tyler, you can add to any other resources we have.
Yeah, I think the only thing that I would add is the most reliable resource is going to be the Department of Education, specifically the resources that they provide to institutional financial aid offices. So the guidance that I referenced that was published on June 29th is available on the FSA Partner Connect website. And it can also provide you additional information with the other disciplines in addition to PA students that will be treated as professional for the duration of the preliminary relief that the judge granted.
And Tyler, this might speak a little bit more to about the Grad Plus and being grandfathered in. You mentioned that a little bit. We have a student or someone who's asking that they lost their financial aid as a current PA student due to a short leave of absence. How does this new decision impact their access to the Grad Plus loans?
Yeah, so again, for individual like financial aid circumstances, your institutional financial aid office will be the best resource. I can speak to this as kind of like a higher level kind of answer. So when Congress passed the One Big Beautiful Bill Act at the end of last year, they explicitly recognized the situation for students that were already enrolled in programs relying upon Grad Plus. So when Congress passed the law, they included a provision that said if you had already borrowed for your program prior to July 1st, you are supposed to remain entitled to continue borrowing Grad Plus loans through the end of your program or 3 academic years, which should capture all PA students. I'm aware that there are some concerns around like students who take leaves of absence that may have impacted Grad Plus eligibility. It's a little bit uncertain how the current dispute over the definition of professional students like specifically applies to that population. So I'm happy to look a little bit more into that and to kind of like supplement the guidance that we have available. But by and large, the professional student issue applies for people who are coming into their programs after July 1st and borrowing for their programs. So the only way that you'll have access to Grad Plus at all is if you had borrowed prior to July 1st. So that's kind of the broad answer. And then for individual circumstances and how like leaves of absence might impact your eligibility moving forward, financial aid offices are going to be able to speak to that more directly as well.
And this, Tyler, next question might follow just what you were talking about. Can PA students enrolling at this time borrow the full amount allowed for a professional student?
Yeah, so per the Department of Education, yes. So the department put out a list of professions that it has determined meet the three-part test while our litigation is ongoing. PAs are on the list. And so now what institutional financial aid offices are doing is taking the guidance from Ed and putting it into operation. So individual students are going to be working like with their institutions to determine that they have access to the full amount of aid. But as a policy matter, the Department of Education says PA students meet the three-part test.
Tyler or Catherine, any information for international students who are going down the PA route? Does this impact them or how does this impact them?
It shouldn't impact them differently. So the graduate versus professional debate is like essentially around like which disciplines like meet the three-part test. To my understanding, there shouldn't be a distinction.
And this next question, I'm just going to read it directly. So the definition of qualifying degrees are now listed as Master of Science in PA Studies. This program offers a Master of Physician Assistant Studies. So it seems some programs will continue to be excluded. Any thoughts there?
Yeah, so this is the major area where we are working with the Department of Education to try to provide greater certainty to programs. So in the guidance that they published, it says that PA degrees, which are in the specific zip code that applies to PA students, qualify, and then they provide like example. They provide degree types. So it says MSPA and then PA. Our understanding, because there aren't material differences between different programs based on what they're called, is that the department intended to classify all PA degrees by that PA terminology. We're currently working with the department to provide greater clarity to institutions on that point specifically.
Another question, with the recent changes to the federal student loan programs, if someone already has $110,000 in federal student loans before starting PA school, how is their remaining federal borrowing eligibility determined? Is there a lifetime cap for PA students, or is eligibility based on the program's cost of attendance?
Yeah, that's a great question. And again, I would just say individual circumstances are best referred to your institutional financial aid office. In terms of what the loan limits that were established by the One Big Beautiful Bill Act are, it's $20,500 annually, $100,000 aggregate for graduate students, $50,000 annually, $200,000 aggregate for professional students. And then there is an aggregate cap of both undergrad and graduate level borrowing. That's $257,500, I believe. So those are the limits that were established in the law. For how those apply to your specific circumstance, again, I would say that institutional financial aid offices will be your best resource.
Are international students eligible for these loans?
That's my understanding.
Okay. A little bit about the Grad Plus loan. Is it completely discontinued now and in the future?
I can take
So,
that one.
oh, sorry, go ahead.
Well, yeah, and you can add to it, Tyler. But yes, under current law, the Grad Plus loan program is being phased out for both graduate and professional students. However, as we kind of mentioned throughout the presentation, there is a slight nuance with the transition period. And it all depends on whether you enrolled before July 1st or on or after July 1st. And so students who enroll on or after generally no longer have access to Grad Plus loans, while certain students who are already enrolled before July 1st may qualify under the grandfathering provisions for a limited period. Tyler, you can add to that as well.
No, I think you covered it well.
Interesting question. Are schools allowed to ignore this ruling and continue to only let PA students borrow under the non-professional loan limits? If so, what would be a school's motive to do so?
That's a great question. And so schools under the One Big Beautiful Bill Act have the authority to set loan limits that are lower than what students would ordinarily be entitled to under the graduate versus professional limits. Um, I will I will say the one caveat to that though is that it can't be made on an individual student basis. It must be made for the entirety of the program. So schools have the authority to lower loan limits if they like, but they have to do it for the entirety of the program, not just if they have concerns about an individual student's circumstances. And I apologize, I have to go back and make a correction about international students because I just got a clarification. So international students actually aren't impacted by this issue due to federal student loan rules. So apologies for the information I gave before.
Thank you. Um, is there a resource on how to get involved with the grassroots efforts?
Yeah,
Catherine, do you
yeah, so while we don't have a formal resource, we do have a number of grassroots action network campaigns that you can access through the PAEA website. You just have to go to like our advocacy page, and then you click to go to the Grassroots Action Network. And so you can choose from those campaigns that will allow you to send email messages to your members of Congress. I believe they're mostly focused on the Professional Student Degree Act. And then we also like have opportunities to get involved like in different advocacy events throughout the years, and that's something like we advertise through the networker. So please do keep an eye out for some of that. But yeah, Tyler, I don't know if like there's anything else you might add in terms of grassroots.
Yeah, I think while we facilitate grassroots events throughout the year, the best way for folks to get mobilized continuously will remain to be our grassroots action network campaigns.
Then the next question shifts gears a little bit. So, as financial aid officers are working with currently enrolled PA students, is the recommendation to move forward in planning spring term loans as if PAs are included as professional students, or to recommend Grad Plus and private loans due to the 20,000 loan limit?
So, to be determined, I wouldn't give advice in this circumstance specifically, other than to say that the preliminary relief will be in place, like um, as long as the litigation is under consideration at the merit stage. So, as I've mentioned, that we anticipate that to be over a number of months, but that's the information that we have at this stage.
Okay. And just confirming, so litigation, that was the next question, the process expecting the next several months for this to be ongoing.
At a minimum,
Um,
expectation,
go on, I'm
yes.
sorry.
Oh, I just said at a minimum, that's our expectation.
And then this person is really just asking for some confirmation. So we will be able to take out 50,000 a year instead of the 20,000 a year in unsubsidized loans as of now.
So, as a policy matter, the Department of Education has said that PA students are professional students, which, as a policy matter, enables access to the $50,000 loan limit. Like I said before, there are some institutional considerations, and so in terms of your individual access to the full amount, your institutional financial aid office will make that determination.
Okay, next one is you mentioned we all have to help. What is the action item for us? How can we help?
Yeah, I would say the biggest way that students, institutions, pre-PAs, faculty can contribute is really keeping the momentum up on this issue, specifically around the issue of long-term uncertainty. I think, while we're certainly encouraged by the progress that we made with the lawsuit, the reality is there's still significant uncertainty for students that are making decisions about their ability to pursue a career as a PA. So Congress can act today to resolve this uncertainty for PA and other health professions students by passing the Professional Student Degree Act, ensuring PAs are permanently named as professional students moving forward. And so participating in PAEA's grassroots action network campaigns, um, reaching out to your members of Congress, writing op-eds, and PAEA and AAPA are available as resources to support you in those efforts. So I think that's the single most important thing that folks can do.
Yeah, and please, when you're engaging either in our grassroots action network campaigns, or if you do decide to like reach out and schedule like a more formal meeting with a member of Congress, make sure that you're really telling them your personal story from your perspective and how reduced borrowing limits will impact you and how it can impact the larger health workforce that all of Congress is dedicating to making sure to address workforce shortages. And by reducing the healthcare workforce, we're not going to be able to like accomplish that bipartisan goal. So I think it's important to always kind of share your story and message on like it's the downstream impact on the workforce and things like that. And then also we do have resources on the PAEA website. It's our grassroots advocacy resource guide that gives you like best practices and tips for like if you're conducting a congressional meeting, like if that's a route that you decide to pursue, and that'll make sure that you have the most efficient and effective meeting as possible. So that's another resource that you could utilize as well.
And Tyler and Catherine, we have several questions about the Grad Plus loan that may have been posted before you all started responding. So I'm going to try to group some together just to make sure we're true, everyone's getting what they need. So I'm seeing this one a couple of times here. If we've already applied for the $20,500 federal loan, will we need to reapply for the $50,000 now, or how does that work? And then another, again, just confirmation on the Grad Plus loans. Will that be available to incoming PA students currently? So, any just additional thoughts there on that?
Yeah, so Grad Plus loans will no longer be available after July 1st. That wasn't an issue that PAEA contested. Congress lawfully eliminated Grad Plus loans. While we would have liked a different policy outcome there, they did it like in a lawful sense. So Grad Plus loans are no longer going to be available for new students that are beginning their programs after July 1st. Though, as Catherine mentioned, if you were a PA student like prior to July 1st, you borrowed for your program already before then, you should have access to Grad Plus loans to the end of your program. And then in terms of applying for federal loans for upcoming terms, I would again direct you to your institutional financial aid offices that will can provide information on any like reapplication that you may have to do.
And Tyler, it sounds like you may have answered this. So just again confirming that um, depending on what happens with the litigation, would students are grandfathered in, would students have to revert back to the lower loan limits if they're already matriculating, if litigation doesn't go in our favor?
So that's a great question, and that's an issue that we are currently advocating with the Department of Education on. Our request is that students that begin their programs at the professional level be allowed to continue to borrow under those levels, irrespective of how the litigation moves forward. The department hasn't given us a formal response to that request. So I think the best way to get to a durable resolution here is for Congress to act, and that's why we're continuing our advocacy efforts.
Thank you. This is an interesting question too. What are the chances you think, and of course would be, just your thoughts here, that universities would lower tuition due to caps on federal loans?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the argument that we have made is that Congress fundamentally recognized the difference between professional programs and graduate programs for a reason. PA school, as is the case with other health profession schools, costs what it costs because it's more expensive to provide healthcare training than it is other types of programs. So we've shared with stakeholders the significant costs that our programs face in terms of things like clinical training site placements, lab equipment, simulation technology, accreditation costs, faculty recruitment. So Congress recognized that some programs are more expensive than other programs to operate. They have fixed costs, and that's why Congress created the distinction. So, um, you know, from our perspective, limiting access to federal student aid is only going to cut off the workforce at a time where programs' ability to lower their costs is inherently limited just because of what it costs to provide the education. The other piece of this I would also just flag is federal student loans are available to cover non-institutional costs, so housing, food, living expenses, transportation, things like that. So even if programs were able to change their tuition significantly to match the $20,500 limit, those additional costs aren't going away, and so that's why having access to federal student loans at the professional level is so important for PA students.
This question, can I send this information to my financial aid office, or do they already have this information from the Department of Education?
Yeah, I will say this is a very fast-moving environment right now. So the guidance from the Department of Education came out Monday evening. So a lot of financial aid offices are still in the process of interpreting it. I would certainly say to the extent that institution may not be aware, it can always be helpful to flag that guidance for them. But institutions are working hard to implement the new loan limits, all the changes in student loan policy that's began on July 1st. So many of them are aware, they're actively working to implement the guidance. And to the extent that they may not be aware, it's always helpful, I think, to share some of these resources with them.
Does this impact MD students as well?
So not the professional degree issue. So um, in the examples that I cited on the earlier slide, medicine is explicitly named. So medicine is unquestionably a professional degree. I will say though that typically medical students borrow significantly beyond even the professional cap. So this is definitely an issue for them still. But it's not so much a legal issue in the same way that it is for PAs because the statute is lawful and it's not really being contested from that standpoint.
And we have many advisors and admissions folks on our call today. And a good question here for folks who are working to onboard a class starting very soon, next month, what should their message be to them regarding the student loan situation?
Um, I would say the message is, PAEA and AAPA are actively working to ensure that students are classified as professional students on a long-term basis. The department has conceded that PA programs meet the three-part test via the guidance that they issued earlier this week. And so I think now the work is on institutional financial aid offices to implement the department's guidance and make sure that PA students have access to the full level of aid that they're entitled to.
And a question here, was the loan limit for professional students always 50,000 or has this been brought down since implementation of the Big Beautiful Bill?
No. So the limit was 50,000 when it was passed by Congress last July. The implementation process of the law has been taking place over the next few months with the loan limits set to go into effect on July 1st. So it's been 50,000 the entire time. Just the dispute was how professional degrees were defined and then applied to individual disciplines.
And then a next question says many programs exceed the $50,000 year limit. Um, as well, if we are reclassified as professional students, is our only option after we hit that limit private loans?
Yeah, so I would definitely encourage folks to explore the alternative options that are available in terms of scholarships. So I know there are a number of private scholarships that are specifically geared at PA students, as well as things like the National Health Service Corps. So those would be the options that would be exhausted like prior to private loans. I will say, while our immediate advocacy objective is to ensure that PA students are durably classified as professional, we are aware that costs to programs are going to continue to rise, and there is also a long-term issue here to make sure that students have full access to what they actually need to complete their program. So I would say today's battle is making sure the professional degree definition is accurately applied, but there certainly is ongoing work to do to make sure that students have access to what they need to complete their programs.
Do we know at this time are PA programs able to assist with this process for current incoming students? Are there scholarships are limited and highly competitive? So, is there any additional aid that we're aware of that might be considered for students?
Yeah, so I would say the most important thing that I would say PA programs can do now is work with their institutional financial aid offices to make sure that they're aware of the guidance that the department has published, that the department has designated PAs as professional students, and make sure that their financial aid offices are making the full amount of aid available to students that they're entitled to under the law. So I think the first step that like programs can be helpful with is advocacy within their institutions to make sure the guidance is appropriately implemented. I can say PAEA is committed to making like all scholarship opportunities that we're aware of, available to programs and make sure that folks are aware of it. One example is HRSA just released a funding opportunity for the Scholarships for Disadvantaged Students program, which I know a number of PA programs are grantees of. So, more and more of these opportunities are coming up, and we're going to share them via our communications channels as often as we can.
Are undergraduate federal loans included in the aggregate lifetime limit?
For the aggregate lifetime limit, yes. But the important thing to know is that the professional definition dispute only applies to the post-baccalaureate phase of borrowing that students might need to do to complete their programs.
If we do end up having to use private loans, what is the most affordable way to do this? Or any guidance on private loans?
Yeah, so I will say, just speaking at a high level about like general practices with private loans for those who have folks who are willing to be co-signers with significant positive credit history, that tends to be how you get lower interest rates. I will say, however, like we definitely encourage, and this is standard guidance that financial aid offices will offer as well, to exhaust all options before you consider private loans. So the federal loans that are available, scholarships, grants, employment-based opportunities before moving into the private market. But for those who find that they do need to take advantage of private loans, having access to co-signers and with a significantly good like credit history is going to get you the best terms generally.
And Tyler, this question again, just got into this a little bit, but this one asks more specifically, again, for example, if we have a low-income student who doesn't have a cosigner, then what? What are your any response to that?
Yeah, I would just say that's why advocacy and the actions that PAEA is taking and AAPA are taking legally are so important. We are significantly concerned about the impact of reduced federal financial aid on programs' ability to matriculate lower income, underrepresented rural students. So I think the unfortunate reality is that, especially if PA students aren't classified as professional students over the long term, that we may just see a population of students that are unable to enter the profession, which is a shame because that's really the population that we need to enter the pipeline and ultimately go on to serve communities. So, yeah, certainly, like I've been talking about, making folks aware of scholarships, like any non-federal like funding opportunities, ideally that are like more grant-based, than loans will be important. But I would just say that that's why we're fighting so hard and why this needs to be resolved because federal loans have opened up access to the profession for a significant number of students and are critical to making sure that folks have access to the care that they need.
Okay, another question. Through discussion with our financial aid officer, they've stated that with the one big beautiful bill, it contained language that stated students would only be granted loans for a specific period of time. For example, the day of class starting to the official graduation date based on the start date. And if they had to step out for medical leave or other, they would not be eligible for any courses that fall out of the standard length of the program. Is this accurate?
Um, if I could follow up on that after this, I just would want to understand the circumstance a little bit better. So if the person who put that in wants to email me at tsmith@paeaonline.org, I might be looking into that a little bit more.
Okay. And again, I think some of these came in while we were still talking, but still several more questions about just confirming as of now, PA students are eligible for the 50,000 annual federal loan money as litigation is ongoing. Is that correct?
That's the policy as issued by the Department of Education's guidance.
Okay. And I'm just scrolling here again, several questions about that about going from 20,500 to 50,000. Do we know, will loan packages be automatically updated or what should students go back and reapply or anything if they were approved for the 20,500 prior to the ruling?
Yeah, again, questions about individual loan circumstances and like reapplying are best directed to financial aid offices.
Can we access the list of professions that are included in the request alongside PA?
Yeah, so that's available on the FSA Partner Connect website through the Department of Education. You can see the full list of included disciplines. And it's also included in PAEA's FAQ.
Okay, and this question again, sorry, we're getting some repeat, again, they came in later. So in this one, just reiterating that for individual students, it's important to contact your financial aid office. And this question is about should newly accepted PA students contact their respective PA programs financial aid office to confirm when financial aid packages will be updated to reflect the $50,000 federal loans offer.
Yep, that's correct.
Are you able to comment a bit more on how military service can contribute to financing PA school?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, many of the branches of the armed services, Army, Navy, other branches have educational repayment programs. So, often, like when you have like significant loan balances, you can get some forgiveness in exchange for a certain service commitment in some of those branches. So I know, I think we have some specific examples on our website where you can look at the terms of each program because it does vary a little bit by branch. But that's something that we certainly encourage folks to consider to reduce the long-term impact of the debt that they may have.
And Tyler, this question is, I think, is more of just kind of your thoughts and maybe an opinion here. What can go wrong in this lawsuit? What's the most likely outcome?
I think I would just say, PAEA and AAPA brought the suit because we are fully confident in the merits of the case. The only other comment that I would make is that it is typically like quite difficult to get a preliminary injunction. You have to meet several very high standards, one of which is likeliness to succeed on the merits. So we're encouraged, certainly by the preliminary ruling, and we have full confidence in the strength of our case.
And this is an interesting question. So, what would the implication be for someone who, for example, already has a master's degree and is interested in pursuing PA school? Is the litigation addressing those who have already borrowed grad federal loans in the past?
So our litigation is purely centered on the definition of professional student and the department's addition of criteria, like I mentioned, a doctoral requirement, a requirement that like professions not be supervised, like once they enter practice, in terms of determining access to federal student aid. So that's it was a very like clean cut case. Our students meet the three-part test that Congress enacted. So that is the only issue that we are contesting in our litigation, and then the only issue that could be resolved through our case.
And then we have a couple questions that are really asking about the case in the case in general. So are other professions also included? Just clarifying in these changes, and that is not just PA. And then another person, similar question, if PAEA is partnering with the other professional degree programs that have been impacted because, of course, they advise more than PAs.
Yeah, these are great questions. So, just to speak a little bit about the legal landscape, so we are aware currently of four lawsuits that are being brought on this issue. PAEA and AAPA decided to bring this case ourselves because not only do we just represent the PA profession, but we think that the PA profession had a very clean-cut case of meeting the three-part test that Congress authorized. So, our case, it was consolidated with another case administratively in DC District Court that included a number of professions like nurse practitioners, teachers, public health students. So our cases are moving forward together, but they're being briefed separately because the issues are separate for each of the professions. Um, so that's the case that's moving the fastest. This issue is also being challenged by a coalition of 25 state attorneys general in Maryland. And then there is also a lawsuit moving forward with 10 nursing organizations in Massachusetts. So, in terms of the litigation, the reason why PAE and AAPA moved forward together was because this is a fairly clean-cut issue for the PA profession. That being said, we don't have a particular stance on the inclusion of other professions. We don't dispute other professions. And on an advocacy basis, there are a number of other groups that we are working with in support of the Professional Student Degree Act that would provide, permanent stability for, PAs, nurses, physical and occupational therapists, and a number of other groups. So I think that's just an important nuance to be aware of is like sometimes there are different strategies from a litigation standpoint and a legislative standpoint, and that's kind of where we stand right now.
And I'll do maybe one or two more questions. So, and does a 28-month B, I'm assuming this is saying BS to MS program, count as a post-bac that will qualify for the professional loan caps at 50,000, or will the first year, the bachelor portion, still only be capped at 12,500?
Yeah, this is a great question, and again, I'll speak broadly rather than just a specific program. So for the like combined undergraduate to like graduate PA programs that exist, the undergraduate portion operates under a different financial aid scheme than the graduate portion. So the professional student issue would just be relevant to borrowing that is for like the PA specific part of the program. So, because PAs are now professional students, like that component would be $50,000 per year, but that would be completely distinct from what would be accessible for the bachelor's degree portion of the program.
And then last question before any final thoughts. And again, there's I kind of went over, there are several more questions about the Grad Plus loan, but we've kind of hit on that. So if you wanted to leave any final thoughts on that, just to reiterate anything. But the final question, has this affected the NHSC scholarship funding at all?
No, not at all. So NHSC still exists, public service loan forgiveness still exists, as well as the armed services based programs and a number of other like private based incentives for like either scholarships or loan repayment. So all of this is completely separate from the professional degree dispute, which is the subject of our ongoing work.
Great. Well, thank you all so much. And again, Tyler and Catherine, I will leave you again any final thoughts or words. Again, there have been several questions about the Grad Plus loan, about students who may have that $20,500 cap. Will it go, to the 50,000? Any final thoughts or words, last words of advice for our attendees?
Yeah, I think just a couple of things that I would reiterate. So, it is a rapidly evolving situation. The court decision came last week. The department's guidance came on Monday night. So, we're going to be operating in a period of some uncertainty for a while. No institutional financial aid offices are doing their best to stay up to date with all the developments and implement the department's guidance. So continue to monitor the Department of Education, PAEA, AAPA. We're going to be communicating regularly as we know more moving forward. And I would just say, as we shared a couple of times, PAEA and AAPA are invested in this fight. We recognize the impact that this has on the planning for pre-PAs, our programs, and then ultimately the profession as a whole. So we're in it to win this. And if we can ever be a resource to you, both Catherine and myself always have an open door. Like I said, our emails are available on PAEA's website. And we just appreciate all of your engagement and your help as we work towards a final resolution of PAs being professional students for the long term.
Great. Thank you, Tyler and Catherine. And to everyone who's on, please check the chat. Rania posted several important resources, Tyler and Catherine's email. So be sure you check the chat before leaving to take that down. So again, thank you so much. And you will receive notification with the recording in the coming days. So thank you.